anything you wanted to know about agaves, but we're afraid to ask. ABCs, just agave cultivation. But what I'd like to do is, we guys show pretty pictures of plants, and a lot of people are like, yeah, I just want to see pretty pictures of plants. I like to, when I go to a talk, I like to walk away with a piece of information, whether it's one piece, two, or three things. I'd like to know something, or know that I've learned something from that talk. So I do a lot of showing of more than one picture of the same plant. And I was told by a friend of mine, he says, well, I'd rather show, one picture of a lot of them. Just keep on a lot of plants. And I have a different philosophy because I figure if there are 100 slides and there are 100 plants, you may walk away from that talk not remembering a single one of those plants. If there are 100 slides and I show you 3 slides of each plant, you may walk away knowing or remembering 2 or 3 or 4 of those plants. And that's my goal, is I'd like you to get some information from this, as well as hopefully being a little bit lighthearted and maybe humorous at times. But I've got some pictures up here of agaves, and we'll get into specific agaves as we go along here. But I'd like to start off with going forward. Let's see, they didn't tell me I had to turn this on. Let's see if it's coming up. We'll start here. I've got several slides that have agave tidbits. And I know you can all read the new Gizmo, so let's see if we can get this to work. Okay. All right. Isn't it turned on? Not working. Okay, random Gizmo not working. Okay, so let's read along here. So agave tidbits, part 1. They're all New World natives. That means there are none native to the Old World. It's a genus composed of roughly 250 to 300 members, species, variety, subspecies, what have you. They all grow in rosettes, and we all know what a rosette of leaves is, correct? If you don't know, keep your hand down. They're largely monocarpic, and what I mean by that is they flower once and then die. There are 2 groups of agaves that do not do that. They produce offsets in the leaf axils of that main rosette, so that they continue growing from that main rosette. They're succulents. They do store moisture in the leaves. They're very sculptural plants, and they're fantastic horticultural plants for desert gardens. Okay, next. Is it working? Yay! Technology's great. So the agave distribution, you can see I kind of outlined it in purple there. If I go a little bit farther south in South America, mostly what we're concerned with are the ones up in, I'm holding, now I go. First not going. Okay. Up here, Mexico and the southwestern U.S. Was that my cursor? No. Mr. Check. Press and hold. Okay, everybody see the red dot? Come on. Okay. Next. Technology and I don't get along. Really. Come on, this is the forward button right here. Okay, now we see this part 2. That's the forward button. Yeah. Okay, we'll try this. Okay, there are 2 basic types of inflorescences, and that's where the flowers grow. There's what they call the spikate and the paniculate. And then there's a third that usually are from hybrid species, hybrids between the two groups. So the way they're set up now is there are two major groups, and we'll look at the spikate paniculate. But if you get hybrids between those two groups, you get what they call the racemose type. Oh, wait a minute. It's going too fast. Okay, we gotta go back. Oh, yeah, go back to the inflorescence types. Gotta look at those. Yes, previous. I think back one more. Maybe. Okay, no. Forward one. Woo! I knew being the guinea pig for the first one back would be a challenge. I will get through it. Okay, so the spikate type, where the flowers occur directly on the main stalk. Okay, so that's type 1. Okay, next we'll look at the paniculate type, where the flowers have side branches, or the stalk has side branches with the flowers at the end of the side branch. Okay, then you can imagine if we hybridize those two, you get the side branches very, very short. You get a lot of them. So that's a hybrid between the two species, one in each group. Okay.
So your volume?
Okay, tidbits are 3.
Yeah, I got it.
There's 2 basic vegetative types. There's the solitary rosette, and then the offsetting types. Okay, let's look at some of those. Solitary, everybody knows what solitary means. There's only one rosette. And here we have Agave shibigera, so it's got the one rosette of leaves. There are no offsets. Next. Another solitary type. This is Agave avellanidens from Baja California. Is that camera going to follow me? No? Oh, good. You know, I did a talk at the CSSA convention, 3 years ago. And they had it set up. They had something set up in the back, and you had to stand at the podium. And you couldn't move. I was like, I really do not like doing this. I do not like being stationary. So I'm really glad I get to move around. Okay, so another solitary type. This is Agave montana. And next. Offsetting type, just like it sounds. This produces a ton of offsets. This is from one clone. And this is one of those that is not monocarpic, so it's polycarpic. So like when this rosette is flowering, there will be offsets from the leaf axils, just like any tree or shrub. When it flowers, it produces shoots from the node or from the axillary buds down by the leaves. Well, these types of agaves will do that as well. So there are probably about 18 species that will do that, maybe 20 species that will do that, out of the 250 to 300. Okay, next. Another offsetting type. And as we saw in the previous picture, there was a spikate inflorescence. This is a paniculate inflorescence. So and I looked this up earlier, they're mutually exclusive or not? Is there a English major in the group? Are they not mutual? They can occur in either one. Spikate can be offsetting or solitary. Paniculate types can be offsetting or solitary as well. Okay, next. Okay, then we have 2 basic leaf types, narrow and wide. We'll look at a couple samples of that. We have already seen a couple, but let's look at a couple more. A narrow leaf type, and spikate inflorescence or paniculate inflorescence can have either narrow leaves or broad leaves. So they can also be changes, so to speak. Okay, next. And broad leaves. Okay, So we put all these things together, offsetting, non-offsetting, narrow leaf, broad leaf. You can have an array of different looks to the agaves. And into part 5, and this is very important. The growing point is buried deep inside the core, and that's very important, and we shall see that as we go through here. So insect pests, okay, we can go to the next one. Insect pests and other pests and disease. So here's a sample of them. Agave snout weevil, the running bug, giant agave bug, and we'll look at each one individually. The Areopid mite, which is probably the most devastating problem with agaves going right now. Pack rats and rabbits. So the mite is going to be the hardest one to treat. We'll look at that as we go into here. Okay, next. Okay, the agave snout weevil. This is a little culprit here. The female lays her eggs or the hole in the stem of the agave. The larvae eat out the inside of the agave, causing the agave outer leaf to collapse and the cone to stay upright. And looking, it has a classic look of that cone being upright and everything else being flat. Okay, next. And this is one of the adults. I paid that little sucker an awful lot to pose like that. And you can see the snout on this thing. Look at it. I'm no entomologist, but that looks pretty deadly. Okay, next. Well, I guess I should say in habitat with the agave snout weevil, there's a symbiosis going on. So when the plant sends up its inflorescence, there's also some chemicals that are released that attract the female to lay her eggs in the plant itself. And that's all well and good in habitat, because what happens is the larvae will eat the inside of the plant and help with the decay process of the plant. So we bring these plants into cultivation. We have no control for the insect. We have a lot of plants, a lot of insects, and it runs rampant through there. You'll see a lot of damage throughout the city. If you drive around, look for like agave americana, where were we? And I saw agave palmerized, I think it was, maybe on the frontage road. But over on the west side of town, there were a lot of agaves that were falling prey to the agave weevil. But the weevil can be kind of easily taken care of with preventative drug control. There's a Bayer chemical company. They have a product out that is a systemic insecticide. So you can dig that into the soil, water again, and the plant will take it up. And then once the drug starts to chew on the inside, the chemical is in there and that'll kill the drug. And presumably kill it before it kills the plant. Okay, the agave running bug, let's go back to that one. So the running bug causes this stippling that we see here. It's a little sucking insect. It pierces the tissue, sucks juices out, and it causes that stiffling. So if you see the stiffling, these are little tiny things. I mean, that's magnified out there, probably about 1/8 of an inch, maybe what's between 1/8 and 1/4, somewhere in there. 3/16, leave it to the mathematician. So they're little tiny things, and I affectionately call them the running bug, because when you see it on this side of the leaf, and you go to look at it, it runs around to the back side. So you have to spray, if you're going to spray this thing with a compact insecticide, you have to spray not only the front side of the leaf, but the back side as well. Because that'd be the front side of the leaf, and then the back side. So you have to spray all the way around the whole plant, just to make sure you contact the insect. Okay, next. This I've seen out in habitat. I haven't seen this in cultivation yet. It's another piercing, sucking insect, but I haven't seen it in cultivation, so I don't think we have to worry about that until it comes into mealy bugs are really bad. If I have an infestation like this, I've got this great big trash can thing with a lid on it. Plant and pot and soil and everything goes inside of there and then gets taken away on the next trash day pickup. You can kind of, if it's not a bad infestation, you can get them with an insecticide or insecticidal soap, especially if they haven't gotten to this stage. They don't have the covering and made that covering over themselves yet, then you can treat mealy bugs that way. Okay. If they're at this stage, you might be able to get them because they're still a soft body at that point and susceptible to chemical control. They're hard to control because they go into the core, or they'll be in between the leaves, and the leaves are so tightly pressed together that it's really hard to control those. And you don't notice that until you see the discoloration. So mealy bugs can be a delayed reaction. I mean, you don't see it until they've really done some damage and they've created that covering that prevents them from being susceptible to insecticide. They can also get way down into the leaf bases here, which makes it really difficult to control. So if you live out away from civilization, build a big bonfire and then throw plants in there and burn it. Okay, next. See, you still can't see me smiling when I say something like that. So you don't know if I'm being serious or not. Okay, agave mite. This is the one that is the really bad one right now. Really difficult to control because of where it does its damage. But this is kind of what you'll see in the damage. It scrapes away leaf tissue just on the surface. It doesn't drill down deep into the leaf surface, into the tissue of the leaf. It just scrapes away the surface, causes the disfiguration, makes it very difficult to have it. What happens with these is the mite gets way deep down into the core. So if we've got all these leaves layered together around this core, the mite is way deep down inside of it. And you don't see the damage until they start to grow out towards the end of the year. So by the time they've done their damage, or by the time you see the damage that they've done, you're 6-8 months into the growing season, and the mites are very deep down into there. So let's see at that. So you don't see the damage until the leaves come through, which would be about now. Okay, so next. So the precursor to it is like this greasy look here, and some will call it grease mite, very often mite, but then you see the real damage is down here, and that's the scarring of the tissue after the mite has done its scraping away. Okay, next. So more damage here. You can see deep down in the core. You see the greasy look, and then the scarring here. And this one is damaged to the point where the leaf cone is curling over. Okay. Okay, so I alternate between two different miticides, and sometimes I'll use an insecticide even though mites are not insects. Both of the miticides that I use are systemic, but they'll also take care of it if they contact the mite, it'll kill them as well. But it's very difficult to contact the mite when it's very deep inside 3 or 4 or 5 layers of leaves. So if the plant's not a special plant, I'll bag it and scratch it and get rid of it. So just to get rid of the whole mite problem. If you suspect a plant of having mites, isolate it, quarantine it, put a mask on it, treat it. So you can get, I think you can get a couple of different miticides. There's one called Juno, and there's another one. They're very expensive. Some of them, just the other ones that you might look at, they go through, they're called translaminar, so they'll go through the leaves and then supposed to contact the mite that way. Be very, 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 very careful when you use that. If you use it in too high of a dosage or too high of a rate, the leaves will fuse together and the plant will never grow out. Well, I haven't had it grow out. I've even taken a plant that's had the leaves fused together and I sawed the cone and trying to get the whole core to grow back out. And even that's not working very well. So use it at the recommended rate or even just a little bit below that and don't use it too frequently. Juno and there's another, Forbid, I think was the other one. They're both the same chemical. I use two different miticides that have two different chemicals, so I'm trying to alternate to knock down the population and get rid of it. Okay, next. Okay, pack rats, they're a big pest. They'll shoot through just about anything. Here we see the evidence of pack rats. They just created a big nest in the plant. So I can't kill, well, I can kill an insect. I can't kill a pack rat, so I try to live trap them. Sometimes that doesn't always work. I used to have a dog who would, she would be my mouser, and she would take care of them. So if you have a really good dog that can sniff out pack rats and we'll go after them, you know, turn the dog loose. Okay, next. So I had this one that was growing near a mesquite tree, and the leaves were up about 5 feet or so. And I noticed all these chew marks at the tips of the leaves. I'm like, what is doing that? We don't have deer. Rabbits aren't going out that high. I mean, that's just why we don't have rabbits that are that tall. Well, Mark Dimmitt suggested that pack rats were climbing up the trunk of the tree and jumping over to the leaves, eating the leaves, and then going back for the night. So sure enough, I put a trap out there and a big catch one. Have to relocate that pack rat and that kind of stuff after that. Okay, next. And there's the little house. It's huge. You just can't ground that thing. Well, I don't know, maybe you do. They're cute. So I relocate them a mile or so away from my place and put them into a great big washout someplace away from me and give them a good life. Say there's a bunch of choya or a bunch of prickly pear, you know. We'll make a new home over there. I also have there's a school a couple miles from us. There's a great big park and a nice wash going through there. So I've taken them down there in the past too and release and say, you know, go have a nice life down there. Just don't come back. And I don't think they do. I think other ones move into their nest. So if you have pack rats, if you relocate them, you really have to get rid of the nest as well. Otherwise, other pack rats will just move right in. You know, vacancy, there's a big sign that says vacancy. They come in, move right in. Okay, next. Rabbits are a big pest as well. Even in like a 3-gallon pot, they'll just climb right up on there, step up there, and shoot these weeds out. So I don't know what to do about rabbits, except, you know, if you have potted plants, just elevate them higher than they can go. They don't seem to bother plants in the ground so much. So I think once you have those plants established, rabbits are less likely to go after those. They look for something else a little bit easier to do. Okay, next. So even this pot, this is like a 12-inch But this offset was right at the edge there, so I think they were able to get up, get their front paws up there and do on that. So I even took a 8-inch tall block and I put the big pot on top of that. That's include salt that, I think. Just that extra 8 inches, they couldn't get that close. So until I see a pack rat that can go up 2.5 feet, then I'll start to worry. Okay, next. Okay, fungus is another one, and this is a classic sign of the fungus, the ring spot in here. A good fungicide, if you see that, a good fungicide will knock that back, will stop that in its tracks. But if you see this, get it with the fungicide. If you can pull the bottom leaves off, but because they grow in a rosette, if you're going to pull leaves from the bottom, you have to start with the bottommost leaves. Very difficult to start in the middle of the plant and pull those leaves. But if you start at the bottom and you pull side to side around, usually you have to pull in a clockwise motion because we're in the northern hemisphere. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, you have to pull in a counterclockwise motion. But the leaves come up more easily if you pull side to side. If they don't come off fairly easily, if you split the leaf in the middle, you can pull from inside to outside, and get the leaves off. But once you get the first couple of leaves off from the bottom, and you work your way up around the layers, they come off easily. Okay, next. Okay, agave edema. I kind of think that's a misnomer because edema is, we have any medical professionals here. Edema, isn't that a swelling of tissue? Yeah. This is a collapse of tissue. It looks like sunburn, but it's not, it doesn't always happen on the south-facing surface. It'll happen on the north-facing surface, east-facing, the backside of the leaf, the top of the leaf. I think what happens, let's go to the next one. So it's a physiological phenomenon that results in that patchwork of dead spots. For example, sunburn. It seems to happen when plants go from bright sunlight to dark in the middle of the day. So like if you take a plant, like if I was going to deliver plants someplace or take them to a show, if I put them inside of an enclosed area in the middle of the day and they go to a dark area, and unload them when I get to the destination, a lot of times that edema, the symptoms will show up after you unpack them. Somebody has suggested it's a rapid change in humidity. I think it's because they're cam plants or can be cam plants. I think what happens is that the cells shut down and water vacates those cells and causes cell collapse. I don't know for sure, and I don't think anybody's ever really done any physiological tests on agaves to see if that's what happens. But it's some sort of collapse of the cells. So I went to, when I would go to shows and sales, I went to loading up my truck in the evening or at night when it was already dark, and then would transport the plants out, and they seemed to be fine. I noticed that when I went from, I think it was cooler temperature to hotter temperature, it happened. So like if I took plants from Tucson to San Diego, it didn't happen, but if I brought plants from San Diego to Tucson, then they would seem to have that. I don't know if that had any effect, the temperature had any effect or anything too. That is one of those problems that the plant will grow out of it eventually. I mean, all the new leaves, if you have it in the same spot, all the new leaves will cover up the old ones that have the edema. So it's not that big of a deal. I think the mites are the biggest problem right now because of the down in the growth point. And then the running bugs are a pretty big problem. Then probably the snout evil would be the next. This is kind of low down on there because it's not something that you can really control except, just don't take them from bright light and put them indoors. That's what when I had that happen more often than not. Okay, let's go next. Okay, cold hardiness. That's probably the most limiting factor for us in Tucson. Here I've got some stats. In the last 100 years, the lowest temperature in Tucson, and Matt, this doesn't include you because I know we've been to like single digits, 8 degrees. 8. Yeah. This doesn't apply to Matt so much. He has to find even harder plants. But in the last 10 years, the lowest hit 17 in 2013 and 18 in 2011. So like I say, there are spots around Tucson that are much colder. But this tells us that it's best to stick with plants that can tolerate at least the high teens for our area, so we don't have to protect them too much. I mean, you can grow other things in containers and bring them indoors, or put a crosscloth over them, or like some plants, I'll even take a 15-gallon bucket and put it over the top. That seems to be enough. But we'll look at some of the plants. I think I've got a chart with some of the more hardy plants. So most agaves, very few are true desert plants. They come from subtropical or tropical areas. Those that do come from subtropical or tropical areas will not tolerate freezing temperatures as well as those from more northern latitudes. Species with more northern distribution will have a little bit more cold hardiness. Those from lower elevation will likely be less cold hardy than those from higher elevation because they're more adapted to cold at the higher elevation. Okay, next. Okay, there are 4 ways to propagate agaves. Maybe more, but I came up with 4. You can grow them from seed, which then you get them the maximum amount of genetic diversity. They can be propagated by offsets or plots. Those offsetting types, you can grow a lot of them, but that gives you less genetic diversity. Some species will produce bulbils, so if you've ever grown an octopus agave, you've gone from 1 to about 10,000 after its flowers. I remember back in the early 80s, the Desert Museum had one of these octopus agaves. I really want to get one of those. It's just the rarest agave ever. I've never seen this. 1 or 2 plants here at the Desert Museum. Well, one flowered shortly thereafter, and then it's like you can't give it away. So it went from being very rare to not even a dime a dozen. I mean, you just couldn't give it away. So if somebody has one flowered, we had numerous meetings where there are just trays of octopus agave bulbils being given away here. There are still, at the end of the meeting, there are still trays of octopus agave waiting to be taken home. So you can do them by the bulbil, but again, they're pretty much clones, so you have very little genetic diversity. The most current fad is for them to be tissue cultured, and again, they're clonal, so you have very little genetic diversity. But if you have a very cute, variegated agave, and somebody can tissue culture that, you can get 10,000 of those very quickly within a couple of years, and then that becomes the dozen at that point. So from selling on eBay for $250 for a 3-inch pot to 10 cents for a 5,000. Okay, next. Okay, so I think I have 15 species here. I stopped at 13 and I thought, oh no, 13 is a bad number. So I added 4. But some of these are generally hardy in the Tucson area. And at the end here, I've got, we go through a bunch of agaves based on size. So we'll look at those. So hopefully that's when you'll learn a particular agave. But these are just alphabetical here. So from B to B. I didn't start with A and I didn't end with Z. Just had to shrink it down a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I think I've got most all of these look like they are. Okay, next. Okay, again, very few agaves are truly desert plants. If you go out into habitat, you'll see that they occur at slightly higher elevation just above the desert proper. A lot of them come from areas with higher rainfall, and many occur in forests. So we have a lot of choices to choose from. And that gives us a great big base to draw from, to look at the plants and say, you know, I'd really like to try one of these, or I like a small one. A great big one for my landscape. So let's, again, we'll look at a few of these as we go. Okay, next. Okay, sun exposure, soil type, and water all affect each other. So the more sun, the more water. The more porous the soil, the more water is needed. Species from lower elevations are adapted to lower water. Species from open exposures can obviously tolerate more sunlight. And then generally, not always, but those with blue or blue-green or blue-gray leaves can tolerate more sun. So the greener the leaves, you can kind of, as a rule of thumb, the greener the leaves, the more shade it's going to need. Not always the case, but the bluer the leaves, the more sun they'll take. Yeah, not always the case. Okay. Okay, so potted plants versus planted in the ground plants. So you can control the cultural conditions of potted plants a little bit more easily than those in the ground. So watering. Potted plants seem to grow best when the soil is kept at what I'm calling the Goldilocks level. They don't, when they're in pots, if they go through real wet, real dry, real wet, real dry, the plants don't seem to like that. But if they go through where it's like, you know, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, or more evenly moist, the plants seem to respond to that a little bit better. Sun exposure, if the potted plant isn't too big, you can move the plant around to get the proper exposure, a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of shade. If you take a plant that's been grown in the shade and put it in the ground in the full sun, you'll have to acclimate it to that full sun and acclimate it slowly. And one of the things I like to recommend is if you have any shrubs growing in your property at all, stop me if you've heard this one. If you have any shrubs, Texas Rangers, salvia gradii, anything, you can trim 12 to 14-inch stems, or even longer if the plant's bigger, but trim a whole bunch of stems and create a little cross-hatching over the top of the plant. So you have that cross-hatching, so that'll give the plant a little bit of shade in the summertime, and as the leaves dry up and die off or fall off, then a little bit more sunlight gets in, a little bit more sunlight, the plant slowly acclimates to that sun exposure in the ground. And you may have to do that a couple of times. I'm always going out there and I see plants and I'm throwing twigs over plants that I've just recently planted just to help acclimate them to the full sun. Soil type. So I'm always experimenting with soil type for potted plants. I'm currently now using a lot of pumice and some peat moss. I didn't like peat moss before, but I think you can kind of, if you keep the peat moss evenly moist, that helps the plant stay evenly moist. If you let the peat moss dry out too much, then the soil gets too dry, it's really hard to re-wet. So I think if you use the peat moss and the pumice, that'll help encourage you to keep the soil moisture evenly moist. You don't want it to be soggy wet, but you don't want it to go bone dry either. So if you can kind of keep it at, like I said, the Goldilocks level, I think your plants will do best. If you're already growing agaves and you have no problems growing them, don't change what you do. And if you're growing them very well, why don't you come up here now and sit down? I mean, there's, do you guys know Steve Platt? He was a member up in Phoenix. I don't know if he is a member of our club or not, but anyway, he's moved down to like the Safford area. He could grow agave Utahns beautifully. I could not grow agave Utahns. I said, Steve, how often do you water those? He said, oh, whenever they need it. Okay, nice. I said, what kind of soil do you use? Well, just whatever I have. So he brought me a 5-gallon bucket of soil one time and some agave Utahns. So I even potted the plant into his soil, and I still couldn't grow. I just couldn't figure it out. And I think I was letting them go because they grow up around Las Vegas where they only get 5 inches of rain or less in a year. They grow in cracks and limestone. I thought, these things don't need hardly any water at all. Well, they're in pots, and I think I was letting them go too dry and not keeping them at that Goldilocks level of moisture. And they would suffer because the roots would die off. They get some water, they have to grow new roots. Then I let it go dry, the roots would die off, and then I water them, they have to grow new roots. So I think they were just really struggling with that moisture of having to expend energy to put out roots and not being able to put energy into growing new leaves. So yeah, if you can find the right conditions, don't change. Okay, next. Okay, here's a few plants that can tolerate full sun in Tucson and similar climates. Phoenix is a little bit different because they're nice when they go in summertime, if they don't drop below 90. That's really bad on a lot of plants. Plants need that resting period. And if they don't go below 90, they're just trying to stay alive and not doing stuff. But in Tucson and Sierra Vista and areas like that, most of these will do just fine. Okay. Okay, size categories. Here comes the fun stuff. Now I made up different size categories. I looked at a bunch of plants and I said, there are a few that are around the 12 to 14, 15 inches across. There were some that were a little bit bigger than that, and some that are even bigger. We went to large, which is 60 inches. If you can do the math quickly, is about 5 feet across. And then because we're all Americans and like to supersize things, I went to extra large as well. So these are not hard and fast sizes. They're things that I just kind of saw general trends in some plant sizes and decided to make these arbitrary categories for us to kind of go by. So let's look at, I only went through large in the presentation, so let's look at extra small ones. So I define these as being 12 inches or less, and some of them will go up to 15 inches. So that again, that falls by the wayside right away. But I think the 3 or 4 that I've got here are Isthmus from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is pretty far south. So we can guess that that's not going to have too much hardiness because it grows at a very low elevation near the coast, the Pacific coast in Oaxaca. Parviflora is a native here, so that's going to be a little bit cold hardier. Polyanthophoras grows up at higher elevation in Sonora, and Tumiana grows up in central Arizona, so it's going to be pretty hardy. So let's look at a couple of pictures of these. So here's Agave isthmensis. This is a great water plant. And this is one that you can grow it in a pot, protect it in the wintertime. It's going to reward you with beautiful stuff. And there are some really cool ones that get really big mammalic margins, the big bumps here, and then the teeth on them. One thing I didn't talk about is that these teeth will create a gentry called bud prints, and you can see that here. And those are formed when the leaves are in their cones, and the leaves are highly impressionable. They're soft and impressionable, and those teeth will press against the leaf and leave those patterns behind, both on the front and the back of the leaf. Okay, next. Another Agave isthmensis here. This does offset. You can see some of the offsets growing on this one. And there are basically two forms There's what people are calling the coastal form that occurs within sight of the Pacific Ocean, and then the inland form, which goes a little bit farther inland in Oaxaca and Chiapas. I think this is still the coastal form. The next one, I think, is the inland form. You can see the difference. So let's see the next. Yeah, this is the inland form. So this one produces, it's a little bit smaller plant, and sometimes the teeth aren't as highly decorative as the coastal form. And it does produce more offsets than the coastal form. And the leaves are a little bit rougher than the coastal form. Okay, next. This is one in a great big pot. This used to be called, well, it's still called Kiki Jokan is the cultivar name. And it took me a while, but I finally figured out that I think that it had never been known by a species name. It was always known by that cultivar name. But I'm 99% convinced that this is a form of Agave hispensis. Okay, next. Agave parviflora, this grows down along in southern Arizona, along the Ruby Road, and seen some near Patagonia as well, and a couple of other areas. But this is a little tiny one, only about 8 inches or so, 6 or 8 inches in diameter. No teeth on the leaf edges, but it has these cool marginal fibers. And then the white paint in here, I took a paintbrush and some white paint one day, and I spent hours painting that one just so I could get that photo. Okay, that. And then I got me Tumiana bella. So Tumiana bella is the smallest form of the Tumianas, and it is a very heavy offsetter as well. It has probably 150 leaves in that rosette. The rosette is probably only about 8 or 9 inches in diameter. Okay, next. Okay, small agaves, a little bit bigger than extra small. So I said 12 to 13 inches, probably closer to 15 to 30 inches. But sampling of those, blue globe, brachiosa. I don't feel too much with cultivars. Blue globe is kind of an interesting one. Brachiosa, Colorado, Parasana, Vigorous, Striata, and Victoria Vegetate. I may have added a couple of species in this group, or maybe the next group, that may not be on the list. Let's look at these. Agave brachiosa grows on these limestone cliffs in here. And this is a really cool area in northeastern Mexico. This is near Huasteca Canyon. I guess I'm not a geologist either. But what happened is, as I understand it, the plates collided and the layers went from flat this way to upright this way. And you can see the erosion that happens. These are really pretty sharp fins, and limestone itself is really sharp stuff to climb around on. So it's really intriguing to see all of this geology. It's very difficult to climb around on. I wear long pants, and I even take it to sometimes wearing some heavy gloves to climb around. Okay, next. So here is brachiosa growing on those steep walls. I can catch this one just at the end of its flowering. It has white flowers, but these are it. The plants, they'll produce big clusters by offsetting means. And it's really interesting to see the crack between the limestone here and in here, and that's where the plants will grow. And just getting up to those was a challenge in its own right, and taking a picture of that. You just kind of have to lean into the foot here, because you don't want to lean that way. Because there's nothing to hold you that way. It's all the supports that way. Okay, next. Again, you can just see how steep that is actually that way. It's not a picture that I took this way and shown that way to you. That is the real orientation of the top. And the road is goes between this mountain and that. And just happened to see these one time and stop there and stuff. Had to trash through all the vegetation, climb up and find a little place to purchase stuff. You can't take the picture, but it's well worth it. Okay, next. Down in Colorado, goes down in Sonora, southern Sonora, Mexico. This is a very common one in cultivation, offsets very heavily. Again, in cultivation, it's a heavy offsetter. In habitat, not so much, but it's got these really cool powdery blue leaves, really nice bud prints. You can see these, let's see, these prints would be from that leaf, and those prints from that leaf up there. This grows on really interesting soil, that really white, I forget what the gentry called it. It's kind of like limestone, but not quite. It's a little bit more, it's more crumbly than limestone areas. Okay, next. At the Desert Museum, they kind of simulated that type of habitat. But you can see very smallish rosettes, very sculptural plants, and the really cool bud prints on these things. Really cool colors too. I think it's a great color. Okay, next. It blends nicely with flowering penstemons. I didn't care so much for having pink and red flowers in the same bed. I think it would have been better all pink or all red. But the blue-gray does mix nicely with those. This is up at the Desert Botanical Garden. And again, that rosette is only less than 2 feet in diameter. Okay, Agave Nicholsiae, I did add a couple of plants in that weren't on the list. So this is closely related to Queen Victoria agave. Gets a little bit bigger than Queen Vic does. The leaves are darker olive green, and the terminal spines are a little bit different. They're a little bit bigger, they're darker black color than usually seen on Queen Vic. And usually these rosettes are a little bit more open, not quite as many leaves. Okay. Another Nicholsiae here, you can see this is pretty much a full-grown plant. So that's closer to 2 feet, a little over 2 feet in diameter, and a really dark olive green color. Okay. Another shot of a different plant in the same area. It all grows on limestone in northeastern Mexico. Really sculptural plants. I think these are awesome plants. If you can find one and grow it to maturity, it really does very well. It takes a little sun, low water, and you put it in the ground and keep it not too wet and not too dry. Okay. And while climbing around on the limestone, they happened upon this little guy here. I had to get a picture. I don't know what it is. I was sending pictures of lizards and snakes and stuff off to my friend Bob Nixon, and within 3 seconds, he's messaging back with what the name is, where I was, and everything. So I'll just send him the picture, and I'll say, "What is it? Where am I?" And he's always telling me, what it is and where I was. So he's really good about that. But I forgot to ask him about this. Okay. Agave Parasana, this grows in northern Mexico at slightly higher elevation, so about 6,000, 7,000 feet. It's a nice, dense, ball-like cluster of leaves. This beautiful blue color to them. In habitat, they don't offset. In cultivation, especially in pots, they will offset. In the ground, they tend not to offset. If you grow them in a pot, they can produce a lot of offset. But really cool teeth on the leaf margins here. So I've grown them in full sun, very low water, and beautiful plants. I've got one spiking right now, sending up a big fat stalk, and it's probably about this tall now. Usually what happens with this one is it'll start to send up the stalk in the fall. it'll stop for the winter time and then resume growth in the springtime, and then the actual flower will appear in the spring. Okay, next. This is one in the landscape at my place, and I like the combination of the yellow flowers with the plants. I got so a gopher came along, ate off all the roots underground, and killed off all my agave flowers in my spot. So, yeah, I was really sad about that. I don't know what to do there. I don't know how to get rid of gophers. I didn't put that in the pest problem. But I'm not sure how to get rid of the gophers because they're underground. We have a suggestion from Matt. Okay, a lit highway flare in their tunnel. That'll take care of them. Okay, I'll try that. Okay, all right. So this is the grouping of agave plantations that I had until they started dying off one by one. I thought I was rotting them at first, and that may have actually been what was killing them, because the gopher was eating the roots, and there was no way for the plant to take up water, so it was dying from drought, I guess. So that busty's gone, and I haven't done anything with that section yet. And it's another project. Next. Okay, agave quintilla, I threw this in at the last minute. This is a recently described one from Durango, Mexico. So it's widely separated from agave Nichols-EA distribution-wise. Looks very much like Nichols-EA, and I see pictures posted on the internet, and as Nichols-EA, and I will comment, no, that, or as quintilla, and I say, no, that's Nichols-EA, and they say, well, how do you tell the difference? And it's like, oh, great. There are very subtle differences. Usually what I'll do when they ask that is I'll get a link to the paper, and I'll say, read all about it. You can tell, you can read about it for yourself. It's in Spanish, and I've had people come back and say, well, I don't read Spanish, and I'll tell them, well, Google Translate is a really useful tool at that. Quintilla tends to have a little bit more painting on there. There's a little bit of leaf shape differences, a little bit of differences. I can't remember. One of them's supposed to be virulent on the leaves, and the other isn't. I don't know if that's really the case or not. I think it's a good species only because of the distribution distance. There's no way for the two that to me, they're obviously from a common ancestor, but I don't know any way to prove that, because I don't know that there are no genetics run on this. But to me, it seems apparent that they're from a common ancestor. So whether they're recently diverged enough to be species or not, that's a whole other thing. It's really a cool plant. It does stay a little bit smaller. It's supposed to have fewer leaves than Nichols-EA, but I'm not sure if that's really the case. Leaf shape's a little bit different as well. Those things. If you grow it from seed, you'll see some differences. Okay, next. Just a close-up of quintilla leaves. Okay, next. We just went through this. I changed a bunch of these. Let's go to the next one, because that's I take pictures a lot in vertical format, and then like when I put this one in, it thought it was horizontal, and it looked at it, changed the whole thing. I didn't double check this one, but I just did that. See, another one, I added that. Okay, everybody turn this way. This is agave shedigra in bloom. It's actually been the other way. I don't know why it does that. That guy, why when I inserted this picture did it flip at 90 degrees? Okay, next. There's agave shedigra. That's what it's supposed to look like. It's again, a smallish one, about 2.5 feet. It does well in full sun here in Tucson, perfectly full hardy. It's a really a solitary plant, solitary rosette from non-offsetting. Does very well. Here it is, the inner landscape. Again, with penstemons. Again, a very good combination for these plants. Okay, next. Agave striata. This is the offsetting type, and you can see this one's got a lot of offsets going. This is kind of a young colony, so it doesn't have a lot of offsets yet. But you can see like this cluster back here. This one has a few offsets. This one's just beginning to do its offsetting, so it'll eventually make great big colonies of that. But it's an interesting plant. It takes years for them to produce those big colonies. But if you like the real skinny leaves, no teeth on them, but very sharp terminal spine, so it's not totally user friendly. Anyways, it's a good one for out in the desert landscape. Okay. You can find them in very leaf colors, so green, red, silvery blue. I've seen those colors, purplish red, highly variable in the color. Okay. Here's one that's more purplish red. This was a little farther south down in Hidalgo. The previous one was farther north, more red. Okay. Then Queen Victoria. This is an interesting plant in containers. Young plants will frequently produce a lot of offsets, and then as they get a little bit bigger, get to the middle age years, they'll stop offsetting, and then just before flowering, they may or may not produce tons of offsets again. So they're interesting in that aspect. And container plants seem to produce more offsets than ground grown. There's a cluster of them at the Desert Museum. I think they did a good job. Okay, medium-sized agaves. I just picked, I think, 4 of them. Golden Cornuda, multiple Teriyaki, and Salamanca. Let's look at those. So Golden Cornuda is a really cool one. It's got this really deep green color to them. And they don't like full sun here. They need a little bit of shade in the summertime to do their best. The brighter the light, the tighter the plant. So the more light you can give them up to, but not including full sun, you get a really good tight plant like this. Okay, next. Again, I was coming back from Chihuahua one year. We were coming around the bend. This was in June, and we saw these seemingly dead oak trees. They didn't have a single leaf on them in the middle of June, but all these green dots stood out. And there's all these agave Golden Cornuda. And I can imagine after the summer rains hit, all their leaves, and when they start to get shade, that okay, next. This one happened to be a little bit brighter green, almost translucent leaves. They make great backlighting also. Okay, you can't go without, why is it called Golden Cornuda? And the common name is cow's horn. Well, that's a literal translation of Obi is cow, and Cornuda is horn, and this looks like the cow's horns there, right? The Texas longhorns. Anybody from Texas? Is it that way, or is it? It's not. Is it that way? That way? You're from Texas? No. Okay. Well, that's what it looks like. Is the cow's horns? Okay. Next. Someday I'm going to put together a whole talk on just plant names and why the derivation of names. Then we'll do that. I mean, if you're not falling asleep now, that's guaranteed to put you right. Agave multiflorifera, again, let's look at that name, multi, is many. Filifers, well, this has a lot of threads on the leaf edges here. Beautiful plant for us, it's solitary, does very well in full sun or a little bit of shade. Very cool landscape plant. Okay, next. Another shot of in my landscape. I think I lost only one of these to the gopher, but they're doing really well. Forget where this shot was taken, but again, you can see how many threads this one has on it. The leaves are fairly stiff, no teeth on the edges, but the terminal spine is fairly sharp, so you don't want to go poking it this way. You can brush against it that way, and it's okay. Agave perrii, this is native to Arizona. There are forms that are heavy offsetters, forms that are light offsetters. Get high elevations, slightly middle elevations, so about 5,000 feet. The lowest I've seen them was in the Sierra Rica Mountains, just south of us, down here in the valley. That's the lowest elevation that I've seen perrii at. It's a little bit over 4,000 feet. But mostly it's an oak plant. So you look at that and think, well, perrii's got blue leaves. This is one of those exceptions that I was talking about. Is not really best in full sun for us here. A little bit of shade is what they prefer for the summertime. Okay, next. Got a couple of different forms here. This is actually the Sierra Rica's form. Really cool plant, very densely leaf plant. Not quite as heavily offsetting as I had seen on some of the other plants. Okay, next. This was in Chihuahua. This one was actually about 3 feet in diameter. From Mexico, again, not a heavy offsetting population. Okay, next. And then the perrii truncata form. This one is about 2 feet in diameter. And it's about as big as it is. And it's a heavy offset. The Xylonacantha, perfect for full sun for us here. Perfectly cold hardy. I love the teeth on these plants. And Xylonacantha is woody spine, and that's what they look like. They have really woody teeth and very woody trims. Okay, large agaves, and then we're going to be done with this. So Gentry, Montana, and Ovapolia, I think are the three that I got. Go through these. Gentry can either be lightly offsetting to heavily offsetting, can take full sun or need a little bit of shade. Light green to dark green, very leaves that are broad from near the base up to beyond the middle and then tapering quickly, or almost long triangular in shape. So highly variable in its form. Okay, next. That's my friend Scott Calhoun. Now Scott is 10 feet tall, so we can see right now. Actually, Scott's about 6'2". We were gonna hike from, we camped out one night, we were gonna hike from where we were camping. I saw on Google Earth that this population of Agave, Montana was only like 2 miles, maybe 3 miles from where we were. Yeah, 3 miles from where we were camped. Well, that was the air miles. Not hiking miles. We hiked for about 2 hours and barely got around this hillside, and maybe had gone a mile. And it's like, Scott, we're not going to make it there and back. So we turned around and did something else. And we had been offered, as we drove in past this town to go camp out outside of the town, we had been offered that the night before, this guy had offered to rent us mules or just to get us to the agaves. No, it's only a 3 mile hike. It'll be no problem. I think that would have been money well spent to ride that road. So my takeaway from that is anytime you can ride to your destination is better than walking to your destination. that was less than one. But you can see the variation here. Look at this one in the back. How long and skinny those leaves are. This is the most incredible specimen that we saw. Okay, next. I love the colors that they'll produce sometimes when they flower. This one is actually going into flower, and the plant lost all of its chlorophyll and all the fall colors that you see like back in New England when the plants start to do their fall colors. Well, that's kind of what is happening. Okay. Same thing here. We saw this yellow leaf one that was flowering and producing colors. Okay, next. Agave Montana. This one, as much as I love this plant, is a very difficult one for us to grow here. It occurs only above 9,000 feet elevation in Mexico, so it's a really tough one. It does not like the sun, does not like to have too much water. It doesn't like too much shade. It's just really tough. I'm still tempted to try it in a big pot and see if I can grow it that way. Let's look at a few more samples of this one. Oh, well, first we got to look at the alligator lizard, northern alligator lizard. I was on a trip with Rob Nixon, and he came over to me one time and said, "Hey, come over here." He says, "Help me out here." So he takes the staff, throws it on this lizard, and grabs it. It was kind of cold, so it wasn't moving for a cat. So we posed it up on there. This was above 9,000 feet, and this is pretty cold. It was probably like 45 degrees or so. He wasn't warmed up much yet, but we took a whole bunch of pictures before he got too warmed up, and we took them off. Okay. So when it flowers, it's an incredible plant. I haven't seen it flower in habitat or in cultivation yet, only in habitat. So I submitted this picture to the Agaves book, or to Timber Press to the Agaves book, and they asked him about this particular picture. They said, "Do you have the original of the picture that's on whatever page number it's on?" I said, "No, I do. Why?" He said, "Well, our lab person thinks that it's Photoshop." I said, "Well, I wouldn't know how to Photoshop anything to begin with." So I sent them the raw image, and he said, "Oh, okay, it really is like that." And it's just an incredible inflorescence. But this is one of those that the inflorescence will start in the fall, and then it will stop in the winter time. You see the great big bracts up here, so that'll cover the tip of the inflorescence and protect it from frost in winter time. And then once spring hits, it continues growing, and the flowers will come out either very close to the plant or very far away from it. Okay. And again, the colors that they can produce. Okay, next. And the last one, Agave Lobatifolia. This is one that I described from the Sierra Lampagos up in Nuevo Leon. I love the way that you can capture rainwater in here, and God, maybe you need a few of these at your house to capture some extra rainwater. But it's an awesome plant, grows into limestone. You get 5 or 6 feet in diameter. Really cool plant. Again, this is one of those that doesn't like the full sun here in Tucson and the Phoenix area. Even though it's got this bluish color, it likes a little bit of afternoon shade. Okay, next. Sometimes it'll produce these really cool riffles in the leaves. Unfortunately, you don't see that as a seedling. You see it when it gets bigger. So you don't know if you've got the ripply leaf one or not. So it's still be a big one. Okay. Okay, so that's all of the agaves. So what's landscaping our new house? That's my retirement. Carol, I didn't tell you we're going to move here. This is she's retiring in a week and a half. So this is our new retirement home. Got a natural man cave here. I love that. The other thing that I really like is you can go in the front door, and if you go out the back door, there's a big cliff here. So if you don't like somebody, you just tell them, "Yeah, the beer's out back. Just keep going." So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much. questions?
We're going to try to take some questions, some from the, if there is any on Zoom, if maybe Brad can create the Zoom question, and then we can take it from the audience. And we do have microphones, so that if you have a question, raise your hand so the people with the microphones can come over to you, and then
I know it was a lot to pack into presentation, but I hope you got something out of it.
Carol's working on divorce papers right now.
Yeah. If you got nothing but a nap out of it, hey, you got
a question for you.
Okay, questions.
When is the best time to transport new thoughts? Actually, real business is now, okay.
You mean physical location, not just repotting plants, but physically moving plants?
Yeah, both, actually.
Oh, now's a really good time. Yeah, it's cool enough. You don't want to do it in the middle of summer. Now's a good time, especially if we have some high humidity. Plants won't be struggling to reestablish. But you'll have to monitor the watering so they don't have too much water and rot the root. But you're talking about digging from the ground and moving to a new spot?
Yeah. Spot and also take the cuts.
Yeah, now's a good time.
Soon they survive. And they grow, they're so happy, you know.
Because it's rainwater. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I lost a lot of things with too much rain. Is like we're getting, rain day after day after day for a stretch there. And it's like I need things to dry out for a bit, especially water plants. Things in the ground aren't that bad. I mean, if I had the last time we got rain was a couple days ago, I got 0.2 of an inch. That only went down maybe that far into the soil. So 0.2 isn't going to cause rot. But if you get 4 inches day after day after day, then you're going to have we have another question? Yes.
Hi there. The question is, for the plants that come from the limestone areas, would they benefit from putting limestone rocks around them? So
I don't think they need it. I've been putting limestone into my soil mix. It seems to help, but I think it's more a case of that they're able to tolerate limestone rather than they need it. So if you've got limestone available to you, it's not going to hurt, especially things like they grow on the limestone, Kelowna, Victoria Resume, things like that. It wouldn't hurt. What I'd really love to see is somebody take a great big outcrop of limestone and plant agaves into it. And if you do that successfully at your house, I'd like you to try it over at my house too. But yeah, I don't think they need it, but they can tolerate it better than others. Okay, next.
Does the duration of the all birds or slave or something late time to set
It'll vary widely. Octopus agave, I've seen them bloom as early as as soon as 4 years after planting. Queen Victoria up to 30 years or so. So yeah, you've got that range from 3 or 4 or 5 years to 30 to 40 years. Not that long. Okay.
People tell me that
it may take a little bit longer. If you pull the offsets, then it may get a little bit more energy into that single rosette rather than into multiple rosettes. Yeah, if you want to get it faster, bigger, faster, pull the offsets. If you don't mind waiting 30 years, then use the offsets.
Do we have any Zoom questions for us?
Yes, there's one
Okay.
from Richard, and would you be able to repeat the question too?
Okay,
Where were you camping when you saw the agave gentry?
when we said the agave gentry, where was that, where were we camping? We've gone up the Cerro Peña, Nevada in southern Tamaulipas, southern Nuevo Leon, right near the border there. And there's, I saw that there was a bald mountain not far away that supposedly had agave Montana on it. I've seen Montana all in the forested areas, and I wanted to go to this other spot because I saw, what brought me to that was I saw a picture of a guy on a burro, and the plants, he must have been a big guy, or must have been a small animal, because he dwarfed the animal, but the agave dwarfed both of them. So I really wanted to see that, and we should have make a trip back there and we'll hire burros. Doug's saying he wants to go with me. Yeah, well, Carol gets first dibs at that. So if she doesn't draw up the divorce papers, then we're going to do that. Okay, Matt?
Greg, as a follow-up to the question regarding longevity of flowering, have you noticed like different clones have significantly different variation? The reason I asked is I don't see the same thing a lot of octopus agave will flower just, 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
I have 2 plants at home. One of them I acquired as a small gold bell in 1983. I flowered last year. I have a 4-part plant on plant. And I got in 1984. And it fell off 5-year-old. It was flowered this year. Flowering out.
I have seen different clones flower different times, and I wasn't sure if it was clonal or if it was cultural. And it could be a little bit of both. The other thing that I've noticed more and more this year, speaking of flowering, and Thomas Stout sent me a picture, he says, what are these flowers coming up here? What's this, can you ID these? Well, they're underground flowering stalks from agaves, and I've seen that more and more, probably in the last, 10 years or so. And I've seen, like octopus agave, the first time I saw it was octopus agave that wanted to put up its main flowering shoot, but then it had maybe 4 or 5 axillary shoots were flowering, and I didn't notice any leaves or anything there, but they were just flowers from the leaf axil. And now I've been seeing from underground flower stems, and they're little pencil thin things that, aren't the big massive flower stalks too. So I don't know what's happening, if it's all kind of related or not. I think we're seeing, or if it's just cultural. I mean, we're getting more and more plants into cultivation, and we're just seeing a lot more abnormalities. And now we're seeing clones of these things, and the clones are perpetuating those abnormalities. So I don't know, Matt, go back to school, do a PhD project, and I'll be right there with you. Okay, any other questions?
Greg, in going out in the wild and looking out in the native ground, see them die. Yes.
It has what?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, that's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you come in the population, you see the spots.
Right. Yeah, it's because they're in cultivation. I think because we're growing more of them closer together, you get like the mites. The mite gets started, blows from one plant to the next. Now, I don't know. I'm not out there with the flashlight at night to see if the little mites are running across the ground, or if they get air blown, wind blown across from plant to plant. But yeah, I think because we're growing so many plants closer together, that the pest problems are exploding. And I'm curious to see with that giant agave bug, if it ever makes it into cultivation, what would happen to that. But the running bug is something that was probably 15 years ago when I first noticed, when I first noticed the mic, probably 15 years ago, and I had this elaborate setup. I took a wire cage and I put a handle on it. I had a great big trash can full of dimethylate, so systemic insecticide, and I put a plant, 1 gallon plant into the wire cage, and I dump it into the insecticide, and I'd walk off and I'd go pull some weeds for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'd come back and let it drain, and I'd set it onto a bucket and let it drain there, and I'd take another plant, put it in there. I think that was pretty effective. It's very time consuming. Much more so than just taking that plant that has some light and walking over to the great big trash can, opening that lid, putting it in there. That's a really quick way of getting rid of light. But yeah, I think I was starting to knock back that way. But yeah, because things, especially in nursery situations, things are being grown so close together that the pest just goes from one to another. And if we don't get some of these things under control, it's going to be a big problem. There was a grower in Southern California, I won't name his name, but he works for, he's a big nursery that does Altman's nursery. Yeah, he said, "Oh, I don't worry about the mite." It's like, you ought to worry about the mite, because that's probably our biggest problem right now, just because it's so hard to control. So if you get any plants that are mite infested,
Send it to you.
yeah, send them to me via waste management. They'll drop them off right at my place. Yeah. But if it didn't cost you a fortune and you don't, you're not going to miss it, I would say don't mess with it. Just try and take care of it. Last question.
Yes, does weather have anything to do with
It's a good question. I mean, I've been trying to think about answering that for the last, 4 or 5 years now. But, it seems like we've seen, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a lot of agaves bloom at the same time. So I'm thinking that, yes, it does. Either that, or there's just so many seed-grown ones or clonal ones that they're just all, we're all destined to bloom at this time. There was a place up on Orange Grove that was the Tres Amigos or something. Is a sold Mexican furniture and stuff right by a Sonic there, not far from that. Where the Costco road is. Anyways, right down there, they had a mass planting of octopus agaves. I mean, they had a grid pattern laid out, so it was an alternating grid pattern. And they all bloomed at the same, almost all of them bloomed at the same time. So that was pretty impressive to see. But that was the only thing in their landscape. So really cool, octopus agaves that nothing. Very quick. But yeah, I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. If it's weather related, if it's cultural related, I think all these things are tied together. Yeah. Again, a good PhD program to study for you. Okay.
Greg, thank you so much. What a great way to kick off. Well, if anybody here fails in growing agaves, turn in your badge. Thank you so much. What we're going to do, because getting late means we thought about how we run this meeting, but it never turns out the way you think about it. We haven't done this for so long. So what I'm going to do is the raffle plants are in the back there. As I read off the last 3 digits of the blue ticket, go up there and pick up a raffle plant. And then if you bought tickets for the door prizes, stick around. If you haven't, then you can excuse yourself and get in line to pick up the 3 plants. Pick them up as quickly as possible. Pick up the one as quickly as possible. There's 8 different